Okay, so tell me a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the disability community.
Yeah, well, thank you, Laszlo. My first introduction into the disability community was actually via my mother. My mother has been very open her whole life about having dyslexia and kind of the barriers that arise during her reading experiences and how that impacts her on a day-to-day basis. And growing up, my younger brother and I always had a home that had equal access in it and had really creative learning experiences because she knew her background and her strengths and wanted to make sure that we felt comfortable learning the basics as children. And so my brother also inherited dyslexia and has it as well, part of the lovely community. And it was such a really great way to grow up where we would have butcher paper on the walls and then whiteboards up on our living room and just really making sure we understood the content visually that made sense for us. And for me, I didn't really realize that she was creating an accessible environment for us as kids. It was just how I learned at home and how I did my homework. And so I always kept that top of mind because as we got older, I had also learned my mother was interested in becoming a deaf educator and working in the ASL community and, really supporting that development of language. And so I then really started to realize why my environment was so structured and so accessible to me. And I really carried that all throughout education, understanding different ways I could learn things, different ways other people learned things. And then as I started to progress into university studies, it dawned on me that I had been working in the disability community and really passionate about education my whole life. And so it drove me to pursue a career in, at first, special education, working in like early education classes in the pre-K, kind of where those early language development really started, kind of where I started and always deeply appreciated. And then that kind of led me on the journey to becoming a one-on-one aide and immersing myself in the autism community because that's still where that inherent developmental stage is really connected with me, right? The basics. How are you receiving information and how are you kind of connecting with that information? I always appreciated that about working in the disability field. And then kind of moving through where I'm at now, I still have that passion. I am just received my master's in international human rights and focused on disability policy and education, both nationally and internationally, to really understand what's accessible, what is inclusive, and how is the international community supporting education as well. So it's kind of always been connected for me, both working within the disability community, but specifically understanding education and how it's received.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Mhm.
So tell me a little bit about your role as a disability access technologist.
Yes, I am a fairly new disability access technologist. This is almost my second month in the role officially. However, as my journey I just shared, this is nothing new working in education. And so, in my role as a disability access technologist, I work directly with students and I really try and understand how assistive technology can better support their experience in school, whether that is through visual supports to help really build out those reading skills by perhaps providing screen reading software or alternative fonts for some of their literature materials, right? Whether that's a digital format or receiving hard copies of books, because that's how they process information. In addition to catering to the blind, low vision community, I also work on that side of the spectrum as well, providing Braille supports, but also how assistive technology kind of to people who don't know much about it, a lot of mobility support is also part of that conversation, right? So we have different type of lab equipment. I have conversations with students with because our institution here at Arapahoe Community College, we actually are a technical institution. So we have pathways for the medical community, for the fire community, for the police academy, and the EMT community. So it's a really interesting conversation I get to have with students about adaptive equipment, specific software, but also sensory support, serving the neurodiverse community, really understanding how academic experiences, social experiences, and the culture here at the university impacts the way that they learn. So we have some sensory support in the form of fidget toys or also sensory strips. And then I also talk about ways to navigate academic culture as a whole, making sure we're really understanding different ways that technology could support understanding the learning management system that they use. For example, we use a software called Distance to Learning, or shorthand D2L, which for anybody else who's an online student right now, there's other platforms called Moodle or Blackboard or Canvas that are also very similar to kind of that one-stop shop of where all your online content lives. And so I have a lot of conversations about navigating the online world as well, because, and I know you're fresh out of college as well, Laszlo, as am I. The online world is kind of all consuming in higher education. So I really feel like disability access technologists or assistive technologists are really at the forefront of that conversation, supporting students right now and understanding how to create the best academic game plan to support their academic tenure with our institution. So it's a really fun role. And I have a wonderful team of 3 specialists, all powerhouse women, who take the lead with my students first and understand what accommodations would be supportive in their environment, and whether that is extended time, perhaps, on some of their quizzes, so that they can really work through whatever it may be that's getting in their way, right? If that 15-minute quiz needs to be 30 minutes, then I would join the conversation too and say, well, could technology be supportive for that? And if it is, then they jump into my conversation. So it's a really fun environment to work in right now. I really
Mm-hmm.
appreciate the role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Very
because that
collaborative.
yeah, because that was my next question. Like, what tools and strategies do you use to help students with assignments, projects, and things like that?
Yeah, and so yeah, kind of diving into where I was going next. So one of the tools and strategies, first and foremost, are just my teammates. And so I'm actually sometimes the second or third person students and staff meet when they come to the Disability Access Services Department at ACC to receive support in any way, shape, or form, whether they need an interpreter for an event, or there's a barrier in class physically or software wise, or perhaps classes are harder than they feel they should be, right? That's kind of always the first question I ask somebody. How is the class feeling? How are you receiving information? How does that physically make you feel? And that kind of gives us a really good roadmap to start the conversation. So one of my biggest tools and strategies are my specialists and my team. They really inform the work I do. And then with my students, as I was kind of sharing, kind of jumping off of the screen reading software, right? So if I'm working with students who need screen reading software in any way, shape, or form, we use a couple different ones in-house that can either change the way that the font looks if they happen to identify with dyslexia. It could change the font characteristics and make the font a little bigger, a little heavier, a little more bolded, or even space out those words a little bit so that they can really take the time to relax and allow their work on the screen to work in a way that functions with how they process that information. And then we also have amazing recording tools for students who, have a hard time deeply listening and receiving that content and writing notes at the same time. That's a really heavy conversation I have with students. And so we partner with a company called Glean, for example, and they are one of my biggest tools and strategies to kind of make sure that students are processing and receiving the information that they need, but also it's a really cool platform to kind of start that note-taking skill expansion and really build out those skills too. So those are some tools and strategies that we use in-house at Arapahoe Community College for sure. And then aside from that too, there's also Google extensions that can help with time management and executive functioning. One of our favorites here in-house to talk about, I have a lot of conversations about the Pomodoro system, right? Kind of understanding what 24 hours really looks like and breaking that down so they can get their homework assignments done in a time frame that works best for them. So those are some really strong tools and strategies, and some of the few we have in house right now that I use quite often.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So, like, any stakeholders that you partner with in your efforts to like get assistive technology, for these students and people who really need them? So like, who
Yes,
do you partner with?
so I was alluding to one of our vendors right now, right? Glean. So we have a bunch of vendors that we partner with, kind of based on our academic culture that we have at ACC, what our disability community is really gravitating towards right now. And so we have recording tools to help build out note-taking experiences, like Glean is a software program that we use on the computer virtually. And then for our users that are more in the heavy handwriting experiences, would prefer a notebook and pen, we have smart pens called LiveScribe technology that provide the same exact support. They record the audio in the room, but they also allow students to have a digital representation of their notes because it's a smart pen with QR technology. And again, just the assistive technology lights up my face, just kind of understanding all the amazing people part of this conversation. And then apart from just our wonderful vendors, we also have internal stakeholders. And so we partner with different departments collaboratively to kind of join forces for support and really understand if I have a student who might be part of a IT discussion, but they also fall under our umbrella, Disability Access Services, it's really fun to partner with our internal departments as stakeholders and figure out what qualifies as disability access technology support and what's IT, and how can we combine this combination to provide the efficient support for this specific student. And so I really enjoy my kind of in-house partners as well. And then community stakeholders, we have a great relationship with the Department of Education, our Colorado Community College system, in addition to the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation Services. Those are all institutions that support our efforts here at ACC and really allow us to provide accessible support that is catered to students' needs and actually matches the way that they perform, which is really great. So lots and lots of moving parts for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, if I could ask, like, what impact does assistive technology have, and frankly, other devices, what kind of impact does that have on students, like, what kind of impact does it have on students, like, how does that help them sort of succeed in the classroom, and like, how does that sort of benefit the community as a whole? It's a two-parter, so I'm wondering if you can sort of elaborate on that.
Yes, definitely. I'll speak about the classroom first, and then we'll hop out of the school. How about that?
Cool.
All right. So I think one of the biggest impacts that using assistive technology can have on students during their experience in institutions like ACC, which is a community college system, but also in academic culture as a whole. I think academic cultures, whether it's a university, K to 12, I think it's a really complex environment in the first place, and especially where we are right now with a lot of the technology I alluded to is all software based, right? It has a high level, a learning curve to a lot of this material, but however, there are so many people in the disability community that are actively using this technology on a day-to-day basis and have a knowledge base that's ready to step into the classroom, which is an incredible experience for so many of our students who are ready to jump in the classroom with their AT, but also are ready to take on all of mine, because I think assistive technology removes the barriers for students to feel less stressed working on their homework or sitting in a classroom or presenting on a project, right? It gives them the ability to regain their autonomy and the independence in the classroom to present and perform in a way that highlights their strengths, whether that is a communicative strength or a processing strength or a mobility kind of movement, whatever it is. I think assistive technology kind of allows people to have the confidence to feel in control at all times, to be the driver in the seat, which is my ultimate goal. If I have done my job well as an assistive technologist, I mean, sometimes I don't hear from students for months and I'm like, how we doing? Is everything working okay? But the fact that they don't need me is just an unbelievable thing for me half the time. The fact that I'm bugging my students is amazing because that means that we made a game plan that is strong enough to support them. I have built a relationship with my students to feel confident in the fact that A, we've chosen the right tools. B, we've checked in to make sure it's still the right tool for the way that they're learning and the skills that they're developing in academia. Because as you know, right, in the university experience at 18 or 35, whatever it is, you go in as one person, one Laszlo, one Marissa, and by the time you graduate or acquire the skill sets that you were interested in, regardless of the diploma or not, I think assistive technology just empowers people to be the best version of themselves. And so I always start my conversation with, what are your favorite skill sets that you have? How can we expand upon them? And what are two things that you are just like itchy to learn more about, right? I really try and cater the experience from the moment my students get into my Zoom room to know that A, they're driving this conversation, and B, I'm just there to already highlight the strengths that exist. And so for the impact that I have really seen on campus, it has really just been watching my students move through our academic culture, walk around ACC with either a live scribe in hand or being able to kind of manipulate their technology on their laptops around the library and really watch everybody learning at their own pace with the tools that they need to succeed. I think that's just one of my favorite things to watch about assistive technology, because whether they're registered with us or not, it's all over campus. I mean, the rise of fidget toys, right? The interest in understanding your own sensory experiences and being mindful of others. I think that's amazing. That's finally being highlighted. But I think definitely one of my favorite things about having assistive technology at ACC is giving those students, again, that ability to regain that spontaneity to kind of live in academic culture and share ideas openly and give opinions and receive opinions. I think it's a really powerful tool to have in an institution. Which
Mm-hmm.
then, yeah, would you
Mm.
like to?
Yeah, because I was gonna ask, like, how can assistive technology help remove barriers that students with disabilities face, like, in order to make things more equitable?
Yeah, I think too that also could blend into the twofold, right? Of the community second part that we were getting to in that question. I think jumping into the equity conversation is what I have seen my students use assistive technology while they're at ACC for the most is preparing for what comes after campus. What happens when I am no longer supported at this institution, right? Because in assistive technology in institutions and in K-12, sometimes it's a lending program. If we give you a smart pin or a piece of mobility support, right? It's a lending process. But one of the things that I think where equity jumps into that conversation and where I always try and find time for is understanding that this is a beautiful experience at ACC, but we are also preparing you for the working world or volunteerism or travel. It doesn't matter, right? But there needs to be some space for students to develop the equitable skills to continue to have this practice. Where do I get these tools? Where do I get this skill? How do I have conversations with people like Marissa once she's no longer there to help coach me during the conversation? Because I always make sure that I use language that's very progressive and use terminology, but take time to break it down for students so that if I'm sending them to the next assistive technologist or accommodation support professional in the workforce, they feel strong and confident in that conversation. And so where I think assistive technology is building out that equity component and removing barriers in our institution, and I think in the community too, is being able to not have to have a game plan, to not have to plan out every single step without assistive technology. I think that is one of the things that AT is making in the world a little bit more equitable with this process, right? And so I I really just love that autonomy component about assistive technology, and that's like the number one barrier we're always trying to remove, right? AT steps in, removing accessibility barriers where human assistance would normally have to take over. That I have to ask somebody, or I know need to go get somebody, or I have to go bring this person with me. Not saying that that's a bad thing, because I love having human support and just sharing space with people in general, and sometimes in the disability community or just as a human in general, you might need support and assistance from a human. But I love that AT can knock that barrier out of the way for the disability community if they have their game plan and know what works for them, and just say, I got this, I got
Hmm.
my tool, I got my thing. It's just like it it allows you to just take it away yourself, which is wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But I think too, one of the ways that assistive technology at ACC is removing barriers in the classroom and in the community is the work that we're doing with other departments, and watching some of our faculty start practicing universal design in their classrooms and on campus. Because if I don't have to be contacted because the course container is universally designed, then that removes every barrier in the room completely, regardless of whether the student identifies within the disability community or not. Because majority of the time, there might be 30 students in the room, half of them might identify with a disability, but maybe only 5 of them are actually registered with us. So there is a whole slew of students that I don't know need support or are not confident in voicing that. But I think where assistive technology is starting the conversation right now, it's starting to remove those barriers one at a time,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
we're still waiting for UDL to get there, right?
yeah, I
Definitely.
guess. Yeah, assistive technology helps in so many ways.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
constantly. I mean, the AT I have in my bag alone for my personal use, I mean, I can't even imagine stepping into this role. As I said earlier in the conversation, it's my second month here in the Arapahoe Community College Disability Department as their formal technologist. But I was with this department for 6 months prior to that, working on professional developments designs, having conversations with the staff members about disability justice practices, right? Universal design, all of those awesome things that the community is really working hard on right now. Since being fresh out of college, right? I had a million conversations I wanted to have once I finally stepped into the industry again. And so I think through those conversations and the way that I felt comfortable manipulating technology, but also being incredibly transparent myself about the assistive technology I use. For example, I am a avid dictation user. I use voice and voice typing, the Google extension, all the time. I have my favorite fidget toys. I have noise canceling headphones. I'm incredibly transparent with the way sensory affects me in the world and how I move through it. And so I think kind of all of those components really gravitated my interest towards assistive technology, because again, kind of like my introduction into the disability community as a child, I was already moving through the world, making sure I had assistive technology that removed barriers for me. And it was so just very welcoming to have my team here at ACC acknowledge those strengths for me and say, hey, I think you should move forward in the career and take on this position and show interest in this world, because you're moving through it like a little AT already. And so it's definitely something that I appreciate immensely and could not move through my day-to-day activities without.
Hmm. Yeah, the really important points.
Yes. If you don't mind me asking, Laszlo, do you happen to use assistive technology in your day-to-day life?
Well, I have used assistive technology in the past.
Mm,
Um, I think I used a LiveScribe pen before,
nice.
and then I kind of used a software called Dragon, where you
Oh
like
yeah.
speak into like
Mm-hmm.
um you have a headset with a microphone and then you speak into it. Worst experience in my life.
Oh my goodness.
I did not know how to like use it, but thankfully Microsoft Word has like a built-in microphone that you can speak into
Oh yeah, I
and
love
type.
the dictation features there.
Yeah. But yeah, that's kind of my experience with assistive technology.
Dragon is a learning curve. So props to you, Laszlo, for trying to take the deep dive.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, but assistive technology like can really make the difference.
Completely. It is the ultimate game changer. Oh my goodness. And it's just, I think, the way people perceive assistive technology who are either new to the disability community or showing interest for the first time, or, hear the word at first, they think mobility, right? Anything that could help you move through your day-to-day world physically. But I think what I like where disability technology is going now and kind of opening up the conversation for people to realize that there's so many different things that could be assistive technology, whether that's low technology support, like I mentioned with fidget toys or noise canceling headphones. Neither of mine have a single electronic element to them. They just make me feel comfortable moving through my day-to-day life because the world's too overstimulating for me. Right? But there's also things like Dragon, which are incredibly high level pieces of software that are just beasts. But for people in the community who have the capability and skill sets to use that software, I mean, call me. I want to watch you in action. I mean, it's just an unbelievable way to see the world and to use the tools in it. It's unbelievable. And so I think it's a conversation I can't wait to continue to have for sure.
Hmm. Yeah.